In today's video, I share with you the second Dynasty massive 3D printed ship, the Cerberus. But before we get into today's video, just want to share with you what the GGGGs are for this month. Each month, Bob the Beholder picks some of my Patreon supporters to receive gratitude gifts. And for this month of January of 2024, we have this printed and painted Strongberg building from DecoQuest. We have a set of sci-fi miniatures from Kraken Studios Battlegrounds. And we have $100 going towards a crowdfunding campaign, which my Patreon supporters are currently voting upon. Go ahead and use the link below to go to my Patreon page where you can get in on the possibility of being chosen by Bob for one of these awesome gratitude gifts. So this is a project that I've actually been working on for a couple of months now. And as you can see, it is massive. This is actually a 3-foot long spaceship. And this is one of the circumstances where I actually didn't have a game to use this in, but it was so awesome that I went ahead and purchased it from Second Dynasty. This model was, STL was $40, and went ahead and printed about 8 spools of filament to print this entire thing out. And if that wasn't crazy enough, I went ahead and increased the size from the standard 28 millimeter to make it 32 millimeter, just because I prefer that extra little bit of space when I'm moving my miniatures around, and most of my miniatures are at that scale anyway. Also, I actually made it a little bit longer because I wanted it to be 3 feet long, and in order to do that, I made this entire section that you see here and added it on to the ship to make it even longer. So after having spent a couple of months making this and then finally getting it painted up, I can honestly say this is so awesome. I'm so glad that I spent the time and energy to make this cool looking gunship. And it's one of the unique circumstances where I actually found a game to be able to play with this thing. I've only done that one other time where I really liked the sea ships from Printable Scenery, printed those out, where I retroactively found a rule system so that I could actually use the ships in gameplay, and that was Blood and Plunder. But here I did the same thing, and I retroactively found this game called Traveler, which is a sci-fi RPG, and we just started our campaign. So not only am I going to be using this in Traveler, but also a couple of other ships. And in fact, my players rolled up characters, and they actually have 2 ships that they're going to have, one of them being a ship's boat, which I am currently printing out right now. So make sure you subscribe, because I'm going to be coming out with videos for each one of these ships. And even though I purchased this original model, I did reach out to Ben from Second Dynasty, asking him if he was interested in collaborating with me, and he was kind enough to send me the files for some of the other ships that I'm going to be needing in our Traveler campaign. In return, I'm going to be creating some videos. Now, this video is broken up into just my overall thoughts and review of this, which is here at the beginning. But use the timestamps if you want to skip ahead, because I show my entire painting technique. I show how I created these windows, these clear windows, which is a new thing that I've never done before using my resin printer. Also, I have a bunch of miniatures that I printed out as well, not only from Second Dynasty, that fits the theme here, but also from Kraken Studios, which I really like their miniatures a lot, because I wanted some miniatures that were more like smugglers or things like that to fit the theme of our Traveler RPG. So just go ahead and feel free if you want to skip ahead and use the timestamps below. But I think this ship is one of the coolest things that I've ever printed, and also one of the biggest. I'm actually going to be storing this upstairs in my son's room. He left and is living out on his own right now, so that's really the only space that I can find to actually store this thing, in addition to a number of the other Second Dynasty ships that I'm going to be printing out. But as you can see, I think it turned out looking super cool. I love that these turrets move around. I love that there's miniatures that you can print out to be sitting in these gunner seats, and the fact that this is actually 3 playable levels. So I'm going to have multiple adventures going on inside of this ship. For example, one of the scenarios might be where creatures like aliens infect the ship and are rampaging across it, and our intrepid heroes have to go through and eliminate the threat. But there's so many different options that I can think of being able to use this ship for various scenarios for Traveler. This is also the first print that I've ever done that was at higher detail than my standard 0.2 millimeter height, which is typically what I print almost 99% of all of my terrain on my FDM printers. But Ben suggests that you print at 0.15, but in my case it was 0.16. And I was experimenting just to see what quality difference there might be by going at that higher resolution and sacrificing some speed in order to have that resolution. There obviously are a number of places where that higher resolution is necessary, but to be perfectly honest, I think I'm going to be printing out my future ships at my standard 0.2 millimeter height because the difference isn't that much. And anything I want at higher resolution like cockpits or miniatures, I'm going to be printing out anyway on my resin printer. So overall, my suggestion is to go ahead and just print it at 0.2 because you're going to be saving time, a lot of time, because this is a ton of printing, as you can see. Also, one of the cool things that I did was I did install lights in mine, not only here for the cockpit, but also for the engines. Again, that's going to be later on in the video, timestamps again below. But overall, I am super happy with how this thing turned out. I just think it looks incredibly awesome. Now, of course, because I did scale this up to 32 millimeter, which meant that every piece was 115% of their normal size, I did goof up a couple of times where I forgot to increase it in my slicer to 115. So these pieces came out too small. But overall, I think it looks fine being blown up to 115%. I think it's fine to just print at standard 28 millimeter. You're going to save time. You're going to save filament when you go standard. So it's just one of my quirks that I wanted mine to be a little bit at a higher scale. Because of that, I did actually print the second Dynasty miniatures at 115% as well, just to make sure that they fit the scale of the ships. And the same was true for the Kraken Studios miniatures. Shout out, by the way, to Kraken Studios for providing these miniatures. I think they are awesome. I did do a review video with their original Kickstarter a while ago, and they were kind enough to provide that for me. And they are providing for this month, one of the gratitude gifts is a set of these sci-fi miniatures. So overall, like I mentioned, this print was amazing. All of the files are super clean, but I do have a few complaints where they are pretty minor, but just so that you are aware if you're going to be taking on this project. The first one is efficiency could have been increased by combining some of these STL files. Because really, there isn't an advantage to having so many separate pieces, maybe for the sake of fitting on your build plate. But even there, I wish that some of these pieces were fused together, and later on, I did actually fuse them in Microsoft 3D Builder and print it out all as one piece. For example, this was originally printed as 3 pieces, and I just combined it and printed it as one, so there's greater efficiency there. But more importantly, you have greater strength by combining pieces, because one of the downfalls of having a print that is this big and long is that it's relatively unstable and delicate. And what I actually ended up doing was, actually, after printing it out, I did glue together each level, and the super glue that I used wasn't strong enough, and it actually broke in a couple of places at the seams. Now I'm going to go back and glue that maybe with some 2-part epoxy, a stronger glue, to try to keep the pieces together. But when you have something this large, weighing basically 8 kilograms, you're going to have some stability issues. So I wish that some of the pieces were actually fused together. Even the floor pieces for the internals, I fused together like this and printed it out as one, just because it's more efficient and it's a lot stronger. I don't need to clip the pieces together. So that's just one of the downfalls of having such detailed pieces, is that you would be better off in certain situations where you actually combine the pieces and then printed it out as one. I wish I would have done a little bit more of that, especially with the base, because the base is the foundation for the entire ship, and I want that to be the strongest. The other criticism that I have is not all of the pegs that hold each level line up. So for example, here in the back, none of these holes actually line up so that you can clip them into place or have pegs that actually allow you to sit this in the back. except for right here at the front. But because, again, I glued this all together, it doesn't matter, where just these pegs here in the front is enough to hold this entire piece onto here. And I do think that the top level here is relatively not designed very well so that it's playable at the top. So for example, you can pull this entire piece off and you can play here, but like I mentioned over here, pulling some of these pieces off moves other pieces, so it isn't intuitively one long level, whereas the other levels, this mid-level and the bottom level, it is just one long piece, and so you're able to play on that level, whereas this one you have to sort of move the top piece and remove top pieces around just a little bit and try to prevent some of the other pieces from moving. I also wish that they provided a template for the windows here and that you could stick in windows in these sections over here. But I just used the paper method and stuck a piece of paper in there and created a template myself, which isn't honestly that hard, but I just sort of wish that they had provided that. There is no way really to get windows in these sections, so it's just open, which, you know, isn't the end of the world, but I sort of wish that you were able to slide a window piece through there. But other than those really two small gripes, overall, I think this set is amazing. All of the pieces fit together super well, super tightly. And like I mentioned before, I fixed my gripe of having too many separate pieces by gluing each level together. Also, it was very easy for me to modify the files, again, using Microsoft 3D Builder. I was able to create holes where I could stick in these lights and have a pretty easy solution for that. I know that Second Dynasty has some light kits in mind that they designed the thrusters back here as well as some other parts of their ships, but that involved wiring. I didn't want to have to do that, so I have battery operated LED lights that I'm sticking into my ships. Now, having said that, I'm using this for Traveler. This ship actually I couldn't find in the Traveler rulebook. I assumed that it was in here, and maybe it's in their expansion rulebook for spaceships, but the closest that I could find to this gunship, this size of a ship, is the system defense boat. So maybe you use those stats for this ship, but honestly, this one is bigger than the system defense boat that I found in the rulebook. Make a comment below if you know whether or not this was officially a Traveler ship. I actually don't think it is, whereas the Type J and the ship's boat, I know for certain that those are licensed from Traveler for them to be able to create that. But I think the Chimera, they just created on their own. So like I mentioned before, go ahead and hit the like button and subscribe and turn on notifications so that you don't miss my future videos where I show you my other ships for Traveler and from Second Dynasty. Thank you again, Ben, for providing those STL files for those other ships. I'm super excited to start this campaign, and I'll be reporting in every once in a while as I print out more ships. Super happy with these miniatures as well, especially the ones that have the particular aliens or non-humans that are part of this universe, like this crazy little guy. And there's just so many more miniatures I think that would work not only, again, Second Dynasty miniatures, and not only Kraken Studios, but a bunch of other sci-fi miniatures would work. Stick around for my how-to if you're interested in that. Otherwise, happy printing, happy gaming. We'll see you next time. So this is the resin that I used from Anycubic, high clear resin. I heard that this was the best. So went ahead and customized these so that there was a dome and printed it out. And I heard about a method where after you cure it and wash it, you go ahead and brush on another coat of the resin on top. But do not do this because after trying to cure it, it just remained tacky and wouldn't dry completely. And I found out later that this resin won't dry when it's exposed to air. It has to be submerged. So that's a total waste. Instead, what I did was I reprinted it out and then again washed it and then cured it. And then I just used high gloss varnish and sprayed that over it to provide a protective coat. And that created the effect that I wanted. Not absolutely 100% clear, but this was the method that I would suggest instead of brushing on a layer on top, because that resin never really solidified and it just remains sticky. Alright, so here I have the Ultra Matte Slate. This is the 2x Ultra Cover from Rust-Oleum. And just painting all of these pieces in sections. And hitting it from all sides. Making sure I get an even coat all the way around. I apologize for the lighting. It's raining right now, so I'm in the garage. And those are all the other pieces that I've already spray painted up or getting ready to spray paint. This is neutral gray from Deco Art. You can grab whatever gray color you want. You can go lighter than this. I wouldn't go any darker than this, but it's a medium gray. I have my hog's hair brush. You can use a dry brushing brush if you want, but basically you're just doing everything on the insides. I'm sorry, you can't really see this very well because of the camera angle, but you're just dry brushing everything. Here you'll be able to see a little bit better. You know what's sort of bad with dry brushing is that there are some print lines that are showing up that you weren't able to see before dry brushing. So there are these diagonal lines here. Which wasn't apparent before. So that's sort of what you're going after. I know it's sort of hard to tell, but you're just highlighting the gray. Here I'm grabbing some Rookwood Red, but you can pick any sort of burgundy or any color that you want, and I'm going to start painting up all of the different colors in the interior. And I chose to do all of the chairs in sort of this burgundy reddish color, but you can pick whatever color you want. And then just grab a ton of different really high color paints that you want and just go to town painting up a bunch of little things here and there. And one of the biggest things is just to vary it up. And here I'm painting up the hazard strips, which is relatively easy because they're raised. I want to show you something because this is probably the most challenging part to paint out of the whole ship, and that is these fuel tanks, or whatever these tanks are. Maybe they're for water, I'm not sure. But because it's behind this grid thing, you have to be careful and not get whatever color you're choosing to paint them onto this grid, and so it's a little bit challenging. So this is basically how I do it. I attack it from one angle, and then I flip the ship over, and then work at it from the other side like this. So you just got to be careful. And you know, if you do end up getting paint on these parts here, you just take your gray and you paint over that. But so far I've managed not to get any paint on those. So just got to be careful, and that's how you paint up these things here. Just by painting up just a few colors, just adds a lot to these pieces. So for example, this here, having a bunch of different colors, and you don't even have to color everything, But by having multicolors like this, it just makes it look cool. I'll show you this cockpit. Just a variety of different colors that you have going on here. And just by doing that, it makes it look really neat. These two nose cones, basically, I chose to print it out in clear resin. Because of that, you do have to paint in the frame. And I'm just carefully putting in this layer of dark gray. I don't know the final color that I'm going to paint it in, but I do think that putting down a layer of primer or this dark gray will just help the whatever paint I decide to put on here. It'll make it look more even with the rest of the ship because the rest of the ship has dark gray on it. So even though this isn't the final color, I'm putting down this coat just so that the color can be consistent with whatever color I decide. And as you can see, whenever you're painting on clear resin, especially with cheap craft paint, you're not going to get great coverage off of it. But I don't care because this is just the base layer. So it's a little bit of a challenge to get the edges. So it's going to take a little bit of time. But you're going to go all the way around like this. I went outside and just spray painted these again, first white and then orange, because orange won't go over dark colors very well. Alright, now we're going to go ahead and glue together pieces that you don't need to uncouple. So I waited until I painted up all of the inside, and I'm going to glue relevant pieces together. And the reason why I do this is because this print is so big that and heavy that when I pick it up and move it around, the whole print actually bows. And I want to prevent that. So especially with this lower base, I want it to be as strong and solid as possible. Alright, so I finally glued everything together. Now this one's unusual because look, see how you have to remove this whole section for it to work. I guess you could remove this section here, but it's a little bit harder. So this has to remain its own section. We'll just keep this like so. But it's this piece that has no place for it to clip, so it's just sliding around loose, which I don't like that much. So actually I have to stick this in after the other pieces are in place. So this one here, with the added section that I put in here, again, these pieces, this isn't as loose because these clips are actually preventing it from moving, but I can stick this top on pretty easily. I also clipped into place here with this, and what's unusual about this is actually these torpedo flaps are attached to this rather than to this. I wish it was attached to here, and so you stick it on like that, and then I actually have clips that go down and clip that piece into place like that. And that's the front. So that's how that whole top goes on together. So now that this is put together, I'm going to go ahead and paint the outside. I am keeping these off just because I do have windows for them, but I need to paint them first. And so that's why the turrets are off. Alright, so I have this ultramarine blue. I decided to go with blue, which is a complementary color to orange. And I am now painting the entire outer hull with this blue. Of course you could spray paint the outside, but there's a couple of challenges to that. One is when the outside and inside are different colors, you would have to mask in order to prevent the secondary color from getting onto either the inside or the outside. So brushing it this way is a little bit easier, where I don't have to mask at all. Also, the other good thing about brushing is that you can make it splotchy and make it look more weathered. Now, of course, you can attain that with an airbrush. I actually have an airbrush. I don't like using it though, because I just don't have a good workflow with the airbrush. I feel like it gets clogged a lot, all that kind of stuff. So even though I have an airbrush, I really haven't used it that much. And I'd rather just use this method of simply brushing stuff on. And because this dark gray undercoating, spray undercoating, is so dark, the blue doesn't stand out as much. If I had primed this either a lighter gray or a white, obviously the blue would stand out more, the blue would be brighter, but I want the blue to be more subtle as a color. And see how by not applying it evenly, I do get this splotchiness. And then here on this section where it's a little bit more dry, it's just not as even. And when the paint isn't even, it just naturally looks more weathered. So just by emphasizing or putting paint on one area more than another, or putting it on unevenly, you're just getting more variation that way, and it doesn't look quite as clean. So I'm going to go ahead and do this to the entire outside, with some exceptions of where I want to paint maybe a different color. But even in some of these panels that I'm going to paint a different color, it doesn't matter that I put blue over it, because the second paint is just going to go right over that. So just go ahead and do that. This will take a little bit of time to do so. Also with this blue, I'm going to go over the gray. And I'm really glad that I put the gray down first, because the coverage of this blue is not that great. So just having that darker gray on there makes it so that the blue can stick out. Now this blue is really, really dark, and I like that because that way it sort of fits or matches the gray a little bit, so that looks better. Alright, so I went ahead and put white on first, again because orange won't show up against even a dark gray like that, so that's why you want to put the white on first so that you have a good light base. And again, here I don't bother to put on an even coat, but I actually want it to be uneven, because then you get that worn look rather than that pristine color. Might have to go back with a smaller brush just to get the edges. Alright, so my secondary color that I chose is this neutral gray, and I'm just going to pick some random panels and just paint them gray. I'm using this larger brush and wetting it down with some water so it is a little bit watery, rather than dry brushing with a stiff hog's-hair brush with the blue. And I also want to make this uneven as well. Don't want it to be a solid color, but want it to look weathered, so I don't mind that it isn't completely even as I'm applying it. All I'm being careful of is making sure that I'm staying within the panel rather than going to hitting any of the other panels next to it. Also, I'm just picking random panels out. There are some that I did consistently so that the ship is symmetrical, but for the most part, I'm just randomizing because it makes it look like some of these panels were replaced after being damaged. And so having random panels being colored with this gray is sort of what you're going for. I made these stencils, and you can make these off of your printer. And basically what you do is, using Microsoft 3D Builder, you use the emboss, but you actually put it in reverse so it creates a hole. And this is just a 2-layer thick 0.2 millimeter height print on my 3D printer. And I'm able to just create this template, and I'm going to use white and very carefully go over the stencil to create these numbers. So I think this is a super cool way to create stencils. Some people like to cut them out of actual masks or masking tape, but I find that this is a quicker method to be able to put a stencil down. Also, since I'm not using an airbrush but using a brush instead, makes it a little bit easier. It's not quite as clean as if you were to airbrush it because the edges won't be as clean. But again, that just contributes to the whole look that this is weathered. It's not a brand new ship, and that is really the effect that I'm going for. Also, you want to make sure that your brush isn't too wet, because if the paint is really wet, it will seep underneath the mask. So I want to keep my brush relatively dry. And as you can see here, I'm pulling away from the edges of the stencil rather than pushing into them. Again, that just ensures that the paint is going to remain in the stencil rather than seeping underneath. So right now I'm going to go ahead and glue these into place, the gunners. Just use a little bit of super glue. Go ahead and grab the canopy. Snap it into place. Then we'll wait for that to dry. But once I clip these onto the ship, like I did here, then I'll glue on the canopy, the actual glass. But I'll wait until I'm finished painting before I put this on. Alright, so here I just took some sticker paper. These are large address labels. Found this image on the internet, just doing a Google search of Martian nosecone art or sci-fi nosecone art, scaled it, and right now I mirrored the image so that I have one on both sides, and now I'm going to use an X-Acto blade just to cut it out. Originally, I looked online on eBay to see if I could get a wet transfer decal to be able to place on here, because I know a number of people do that. But because the background of my ship is so dark with the blue, I didn't think a wet transfer decal would work, so I decided to go with a sticker instead. I know it doesn't look really in place with everything else being so weathered, but I couldn't figure out a way to really get nose cone art onto this ship in a way that made it so that it wasn't hand painted. Also, I know that the name of the ship is usually scripted on there too, and I decided not to do that because I didn't think I could make it even. But I don't know, make a comment below what you think about it. I think it looks pretty good. Grabbing some zinc. This is a darker silver. Just a couple of spots. I'm just gonna dry brush the silver over them. So this is a lighter silver, so contrast that. This is much darker. And what we're going to be doing is sort of lining. So here's an example here. You want to carefully just hit the edges and see how it's smudging a little bit. That's perfectly fine because this is where paint is coming off unevenly, and for the most part on pieces the corners or edges is where paint is going to come off from wear and tear. So even if you get big smudges and things like that, that's perfectly fine. And then I'll turn this piece sort of sideways to grab these edges. And see how I smudged it there like that? Totally doesn't matter. So that's what you're going for. So when you first push these in, they're super loose, and the trick to it is to actually get it to where you want it and then push it in even more, and that will lock it in place. And then when you want to move it up and down, you can just place it where you want and again push it in, and it pretty much sticks there. Okay, to try to figure out how to do the windows, I actually just use paper and use scissors just to cut it down to the right size. And basically eyeballing it here, like so. Making sure it fits with the paper first, and then going to the plastic. So recently I got my Marvel Zombies, and this is the plastic insert that was in there. I use different inserts, and so I'm going to go ahead and cut this up. But you can use any packaging material that has this clear stuff. And what I'll do is I'll just set this up against it and use scissors to cut it out. Now that I have the windows cut, I go ahead and just glue this top part in, because there's no use keeping it separate. Go ahead and use the affiliate link below to go to Amazon and pick these up if you want. There's 10 that comes to a pack. Basically, you unscrew these, remove this protective plastic, and then it can turn on. What's awesome about this is not only do you have different colors, but you also have a remote so you don't have to have an on-off button. So I'll go ahead and turn this off. And you need 4 of them, at least the way that I designed it. And one of them, I went ahead and modified this file, this roof, so that one of these just goes in here. And I made it tight enough that I don't need to glue it in. I don't want to glue it in because I want to be able to pull it out and replace the batteries as needed. And so when I put this top back on, I can go ahead and use this to turn it back on. And it's flashing right now. And I can make it just one color, just white, or any of these others, or different colors, which is just awesome. And I can make it strobe, like this, fade in and out to different colors. Or I can make it faster like this. So just super awesome. I also made a hole here in the engines so that I can stick these in here as well. And then be able to turn this on. Obviously the engines I want just red, and I could choose to strobe it like that. And change different colors. One of the things about these lights though is if you're not going to be using them for a while, you do want to remove them and just twist, or else the battery will sort of be used up over time. And then we're going to do some final touch-up painting around the hatches.